think of all the fun I've missed.
It was Christmas Day, 2008. While the world unwrapped gifts and listened to holiday carols, a singular voice, the husky purring whisper behind the timeless Santa Baby, fell silent forever. Eartha Kitt, the original Catwoman, passed away in the quiet company of her only daughter. She was 81. To many, she was the glamorous performer in sleek leather, the embodiment of feline seduction in 1960s Batman, or simply the singer who made Christmas a little sassier. But behind that iconic voice and irresistible persona was a woman whose life unfolded like a fierce ballet, graceful, daring, defiant. Who was Eartha Kitt really? She was born in poverty, survived rejection, and rose through the smoke of post-war cabarets to captivate the world stage. Yet at the peak of her fame, a single moment of truth, a bold comment at the White House, shattered her American career. For over a decade, she vanished from the mainstream, blacklisted, exiled by her own country. And still she never softened, never apologized. She kept singing, performing, refusing to play by anyone else's rules. Her death was noted briefly in the press. Original Catwoman dies at 81, the headline said. But few truly grasped the weight of the legacy that passed with her. Eartha Kitt was not just a performer, she was a force of nature, a storm in high heels, a contradiction wrapped in elegance and rage, laughter and pain. In her final years, long past the glitter of Hollywood, she returned to cabaret stages, whispering her truths through cracked vocals and fierce gazes. Even in illness, she performed. Even in fading light, she burned bright.
"I'm not afraid of dying," she once said. "I'm afraid of being forgotten."
So before we let her memories slip into the shadows, this is the story of a woman who dared to be evil, who dared to love herself first, and who refused to kneel, even when the world tried to make her disappear. This is the story of Eartha Kitt. Eartha Mae Keith was born on January 17, 1927, in the cotton fields of South Carolina. Her birth was not celebrated. She was the child of a biracial affair, her mother, a young black woman, and her father, believed to be a white man whose identity remained a ghost. In a deeply segregated South, this meant Eartha was too black for the white world and too light for the black one. From her very first breath, she was an outsider. She grew up in poverty, shuffled between households, often unwanted. Her stepfather refused to raise a mixed-race child. Her mother abandoned her. Beatings were common. Rejection was routine. By age 8, Eartha had already learned how to survive on scraps, not just of food, but of love. At 15, she ran away to Harlem, New York, clinging to the hope that somewhere beyond the pain, life had more to offer. It was there that a new chapter began. She auditioned for the Katherine Dunham Dance Company, one of the first African-American modern dance troupes, and got in. She had never trained formally, but her rawness, her fire, could not be ignored. Touring the world with Dunham's company, Eartha witnessed places that didn't know her past, didn't care about her skin. Europe embraced her, Paris adored her. She sang in cabarets, danced in feathers, and found her voice in smoky rooms where the rules of race and gender bent under the weight of charisma. By the early 1950s, she returned to America, this time not as a discarded child, but as a woman who had reinvented herself. Her performances were electric, part panther, part poet. She sang in French, English, and Spanish, her voice dripping with seduction and melancholy. Hollywood noticed. Broadway opened its doors. She was cast in films, signed record deals, and seduced audiences with a whisper. But beneath the glamour remained the scarred girl from South Carolina, brilliant, bruised, and burning with something no stage could contain. She once said, I've always felt like I belonged to no one and everywhere at once. Eartha Kitt's rise wasn't a Cinderella story, it was a survival story, sharp-edged, unpolished, and painfully beautiful. And in every song, every look, she brought that truth with her. By the mid-1950s, Eartha Kitt was no longer a struggling dancer or nightclub singer. She had become a sensation. Her voice, instantly recognizable, half whisper, half purr, seduced radio waves across America. But it wasn't just the sound that enchanted audiences, it was the presence. When Eartha walked into a room, she didn't enter, she arrived. She recorded sultry songs that pushed boundaries, none more iconic than Santa Baby in 1953. Wrapped in flirtation and irony, it wasn't just a Christmas tune, it was a revolution, a woman asking for gifts not with sweetness, but with wit and command. For the first time, millions heard a female voice on the radio that didn't beg, it demanded. On stage, she captivated Broadway. On screen, she held her own in Hollywood. Her role as Helen of Troy in time runs and performances in films like New Faces showed a range far beyond the roles women of color were usually offered. But it was in 1967, stepping into the black leather catsuit as Catwoman in the Batman television series, that Eartha became a legend. Sleek, sharp, and impossibly charismatic, her Catwoman was unlike anything TV had seen. In a role previously played by white actresses, Eartha broke the mold, redefining what it meant to be alluring, dangerous, and powerful. Kids loved her, adults were mesmerized. Still, despite her success, the racism of the industry never truly left her side. Casting directors hesitated, studios questioned her marketability. Critics often reduced her to a caricature of exoticism. Yet Eartha knew who she was. She sharpened her accent, leaned into the mystery, and made sure that when she performed, she controlled the room. She didn't just perform for the camera, she challenged it. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, she traveled the world, performing for kings, presidents, and audiences who didn't know whether to be entertained or entranced. Her one-woman shows were theatrical firestorms, singing, dancing, storytelling, all with that piercing gaze that seemed to see right through you. But fame for Eartha was never a resting place. It was a stage, and she knew stages shift. In a world that tried to define her, she chose to remain undefinable. One moment she was the toast of Paris, the next a headliner in Vegas. Always on the move, always aware that the spotlight could turn cold.
And one day, it did.
In the public eye, Eartha Kitt was the embodiment of control, allure, and elegance. But behind the smoky voice and sharp heels was a woman with a tender, aching need for love, real love, not applause, not adoration, something softer, something safe. In 1960, she married real estate businessman John W. MacDonald. Their union produced her only child, a daughter named Kit Shapiro, the light of her life. But the marriage, like many things in Eartha's world, could not hold against her intensity. It ended in divorce just 4 years later, and Eartha never married again. She became a single mother in a world that wasn't kind to single black women, let alone one as unconventional as her. Yet she devoted herself entirely to raising her daughter, determined to give Kit the stable, loving home she herself never had. To the world, Eartha remained mysterious and fierce. But at home she cooked meals, braided hair, and sang lullabies, not on stage, but by the bedside. Her daughter often described her not as glamorous, but as deeply nurturing, fiercely protective, and heartbreakingly human. Romantically, Eartha had many admirers. She was courted by millionaires, pursued by stars. But trust did not come easy. Too many betrayals in childhood had taught her that love was never guaranteed. "A man has always wanted to lay me down," she once said, "but never stand beside me." And so she chose independence over illusion. Her relationships were fleeting and sometimes distant. She wasn't cold, she was careful. A woman who had built her own throne could not accept being anyone's afterthought. In moments of vulnerability, she confided that the stage felt safer than real life. There, she could control the script. At home, she feared abandonment, she feared silence, she feared being misunderstood. But with her daughter, there were no masks. Kit Shapiro became her anchor, her confidant, her reason to fight through illness and exile. In the final years of her life, when the lights faded and the phone calls stopped, it was her daughter's hand Eartha held, whispering memories, regrets, and hope. She once told Kit, "You are the only person I've ever been able to trust completely." For all the seduction and fame, it was this quiet, sacred bond, a mother and daughter surviving the world together, that defined Eartha Kitt's truest legacy of love. The fall didn't come with scandal. It came with a silence that stretched across years. In 1968, during a public luncheon in Washington, Eartha Kitt spoke candidly, too candidly perhaps, for the room. What she shared came from a place of care and conviction, but not everyone was ready to hear it. Her honesty, so central to who she was suddenly viewed as unwelcome. In the months that followed, the glow around her dimmed. Invitations slowed, calls stopped. Projects that had once been certain slipped quietly away. Without a headline, without an official explanation, Eartha found herself edged out. Hollywood, once eager to cast her, turned its gaze elsewhere. The very voice that had once enchanted America was now too bold, too difficult to categorize, too unfiltered. And so the doors she once walked through with grace and pride were now gently but firmly closed. She didn't fight it. She packed her heels, her gowns, her music, and left. Europe embraced her like an old friend. In Paris, she sang under soft lights in smoky cabarets. In Amsterdam and Berlin, her name still drew applause. She spoke in 3 languages, sang in 5, and danced in 6-inch heels, still unstoppable, still elegant. Yet, even applause can feel hollow when your heart longs for home. She missed her daughter, she missed the rhythm of American streets, she missed the land that had once made her dream of stardom and belonging. Through the 1970s and into the early 80s, Eartha lived in this strange limbo, revered abroad, nearly invisible back home. She wasn't bitter, but she carried the ache of being misunderstood. Still, she kept performing, she kept shining, because that was who she was. She once said, "My recipe for life is not being afraid of myself." And even in exile, she followed that recipe to the letter. No compromise, no softening of the edges. By the time America remembered her, she was no longer waiting. She had built a new stage on her own terms. What does it mean to be cast aside without a word? And what kind of strength does it take to return, not in defeat, but with grace? Eartha Kitt didn't just survive exile, she transformed it into a second act. When Eartha Kitt returned to American stages in the late 1980s, she was no longer the fresh-faced siren of the 1950s, nor the scandalized activist of 1968. She was something rarer, a woman who had faced exile and outlived it. Her voice had aged, but beautifully. Smokier, deeper, with the kind of fragility that made each lyric feel more human. She wasn't just performing songs anymore, she was living them on stage, one breath at a time. Nightclubs became sanctuaries. Her one-woman cabaret shows sold out not because of nostalgia, but because of presence. People came to feel something real, and Eartha gave it to them every night. She sang, "I want to be evil, not with rebellion, but with wisdom." She performed "C'est si bon" like a woman who had tasted sweetness, bitterness, and still chose laughter. She told stories between songs, raw, witty, sometimes painful. In one late performance, her voice cracked mid-verse. The crowd fell silent. Eartha smiled, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "This is what honesty sounds like." The audience rose to their feet. Not for perfection, but for truth. But behind the curtains, her health began to wane. In 2006, she was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. She kept it quiet. She continued to perform. She refused to surrender her stage until her body made it impossible. Even when pain laced her every movement, she still showed up, makeup on, heels high, eyes blazing. In her final interviews, she did not speak of regrets, only of love, love for her daughter, love for the stage, love for herself. She had finally made peace with a world that had once tried to erase her. On December 25, 2008, Eartha Kitt passed away in her home, in the arms of her daughter, with soft music playing in the background. It was Christmas. Santa Baby was on the radio, and somewhere between the final verse and a mother's last breath, the world lost more than a performer. It lost a truth-teller, a rebel wrapped in elegance. She didn't die with applause, she died with love. And that perhaps was the final triumph of Eartha Kitt. Long after her passing, Eartha Kitt's voice still echoes at cocktail parties, in department stores, on snowy December nights when Santa Baby spins once again through the airwaves. But her legacy is far greater than a holiday tune or a leather catsuit. It is the mark of a woman who refused to shrink. She remains a symbol of fierce independence, a woman who claimed space in rooms not made for her, who spoke truth to power and paid the price without flinching. For black women in entertainment, for single mothers, for survivors of poverty and silence, Eartha became more than a celebrity. She became proof. Proof that fire could live inside elegance, that softness could coexist with defiance. Her portrayal of Catwoman wasn't just memorable, it was radical. At a time when representation was limited and typecasting was the norm, she embodied power, intelligence, and sexual agency without apology. Decades later, actresses like Halle Berry and Zoe Kravitz would don the same mask. But it was Eartha who redefined what that mask could mean. In feminist circles, she's now cited as a pioneer, speaking openly about self-love, aging, sexuality, and womanhood long before it was safe or popular to do so. "I fall in love with myself," she once said, "and I want someone to share it with me." That wasn't vanity, it was survival. Her influence extended beyond art. Her daughter, Kit Shapiro, carries the torch, managing a beauty line in Eartha's name and writing about her mother's wisdom with reverence. And younger generations, through TikTok clips and vinyl rediscoveries, are learning her name, not just for her glamour, but for her grit. Yet, despite the honors and the retrospectives, Eartha's fear lingered. "I'm not afraid of dying," she told her daughter. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." And maybe that's what makes her story so poignant, not just what she achieved, but how close she came to erasure. But Eartha Kitt is not forgotten. She lives in the curl of a sly smile, in the swagger of a woman who knows her worth, in every artist who dares to be different and refuses to apologize for it. Her legacy is not preserved in glass. It moves, it breathes, it sings. Some stars burn fast and vanish, others flicker quietly through time. But Eartha Kitt, she was never meant to fade. Her life was not a straight line. It was a series of sharp turns, hidden valleys, and unexpected rises, and at every point she chose to keep going, not to chase fame, but to chase truth, her truth. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't always adored, but she was always unmistakably herself. A woman who wore defiance like perfume, a voice that could purr growl, or pierce the quiet with a single note. A presence that could fill a room without ever raising her voice. Even when the spotlight dimmed, she didn't seek permission to shine. Even when the crowds grew smaller, she gave everything to those who still listened. Because Eartha understood something many of us forget. Value isn't measured by volume. A whisper can change a life. A single look can shift the room. In her later years, she was asked if she feared death. Her answer was simple. I don't fear dying, I fear being forgotten. But how could we forget a woman who redefined what it meant to be seen? Her music still dances through winter air. Her performances still teach us what elegance with edge looks like. Her words, blunt, poetic, unapologetically honest, still find their way into the hearts of those who need them. Eartha Kitt's story is a mirror. It reflects what we admire, but also what we often resist: boldness, individuality, complexity. She didn't fit into categories, she made her own. So if there's a lesson in her life, maybe it's this. Don't wait to be accepted before you dare to be real. Don't dim your light to make others comfortable. Don't trade your voice for silence. And above all, don't live small. If Eartha could rise from the shadows of rejection, sing with a broken heart, and smile even when the world didn't smile back, then maybe we can too. So the next time you hear her name or her songs, don't just remember the icon. Remember the woman, the survivor, the artist who kept choosing herself even when the world didn't.
And ask yourself, what part of you is still waiting to be seen?
If Eartha's journey moved you, keep her voice alive. Subscribe to the channel. Share your reflections in the comments. Pass her story to someone who needs courage today.